Hi, and welcome to Great Movie Scenes, the first series to discuss just that, great scenes from movies. Today, I have the privilege of talking to actor John Rothman. You have seen him, I know you have seen him in a ton of films and television and on the theater, probably. Um, I'm really actually excited to talk to you because when I was first told that I was going to be interviewing you, I instantly thought of the first movie that I could remember seeing you in, which was Copycat. And that movie still actually haunts me to this day. I cannot go into public restrooms because of a scene in that movie. So, talking about movie scenes, go watch Copycat as well. But thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you doing with all of the craziness in this world that's going on?
I'm doing fine. As I was telling you, I'm in Cape Cod, and I'm in Wellfleet, the home of the Wellfleet Drive-In, where I have to say that last week, 2 weekends ago, do you know what the #1 movie in America was 2 weekends ago?
No.
Every movie theater shut. The #1 movie theater in America was Ghostbusters.
And you were also in Ghostbusters.
I was in Ghostbusters, and
Awesome.
Ghostbusters was in the drive-in. So my whole family went to see me in Ghostbusters.
That's awesome.
And it was pretty awesome because I haven't seen. I mean, that was maybe the second or third movie I was in, and 35 years ago, and I haven't seen it on a big screen,
Mhm.
super big screen in
Yeah,
that long. So it's still, as you probably know, is still a funny movie that holds up.
it's
Really,
yeah.
it's one of the great movies of my. When
I
people say he is known for, and
mm,
that's the movie that people, because just say this, that was one of the first movies that people watched multiple times. They had VHS, they had DVD, they
yeah.
loved the movie, they could say, I mean, a woman who was in the trailer in the truck next to me, and we were they spaced out the drive-in, but she recognized me, and she
Oh,
said she'd seen the movie 30 times.
oh my gosh. Wow.
It's a little part, and it's interesting because today we're going to talk about a small part, and that's
Mm,
interesting how a really good small part. I mean, I said that was a bit part for the ages because Bill
yeah.
Murray turns to me and says, "Back off, man! I'm a scientist,"
Hmm.
which was
Yeah.
that was on T-shirts. That's just such a great line, and that was in my thing. So
That's amazing. And I mean, I do have to say, when I was told that I'd be interviewing you, like I said, the first thing I thought of was Copycat. But then when I started to think about it and I was looking through your IMDb, I do have to say that you're kind of a rare actor in the sense that done it. You've done it all. Like you started in theater. You've done television. You've done soap operas. You've done mainstream, film. So it's rare because now in my age coming up, it's like people like, I just want to be in like a blockbuster movie. And it's like, well, no, you have to work up. And if you're an actor and you just want to tell a story, tell any kind of story on any kind of platform. So I have to say it's great. And so like some of the movies that like I remember you from, like I said, Copycat, but also like Prime, like some of these smaller, movies that aren't these like big blockbusters. But I loved that movie so much. It was
and me
great.
too. And it's so sad that more people don't know that movie.
I
And what
loved
you
it.
said was the problem, and I really think they're right, is the title doesn't really work. Prime.
Mm,
Doesn't
yeah,
tell you enough. It's not like Devil Wears Prada, another
right.
movie with Meryl. Devil Wears Prada, that's a great title,
Yeah,
Prime now. But the movie is really funny. And I have to
yeah.
say, in I was in Morocco a couple of years ago, and it was on television in Spanish,
Oh, cool.
and it was hilarious. And Meryl, she's such a great physical comedian. That
Mm,
scene where Uma's talking about the sex that she's having with Brian
there's,
Greenberg,
yeah,
and she's like freaking out in the thing,
yeah,
and to see it in Spanish, so you're not even dubbed, but what you're seeing is the
right.
physical comedian that she is, and
Yeah.
it's like hilarious. I mean, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe that's one of my favorite scenes, and certainly the scene with her on the roof eating sandwiches and talking about, how are we going to tell our parents that our Jewish son is
Yeah.
a Christ, whatever. That was,
Yeah.
yeah. That
It was
was,
just, I remember the scene because I was thinking about like when you see them in the store and
oh,
she like pulls you down and like all that stuff.
Hayden
I just think
Memorable.
it's
That's
a
that.
great movie.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm old. I've been doing this for 40 years, and
that's amazing.
my first movie was, and in a way, I say it's sort of been downhill from there because it was so special. My first movie was Stardust Memories, which is a Woody Allen movie. It's
Mm,
actually a terrific, great movie, black and white movie shot by Gordon Willis, with starring Marie Christine Barreau, Charlotte Rampling, Jessica Harper, and I have a wonderful part in it. I play Jessica's boyfriend, the film professor from Columbia, and I was in the entire movie. My deal was I was on that movie for 24 weeks. 24 weeks. And I was like, whenever Jessica would be there, I would be called, I would be
yeah.
there. And I have some very funny scenes in it, but basically I was in the movie from beginning to end. And as a first experience, as a making a movie, it was
Yeah.
incredible. And working with with great actors, Tony Roberts plays his best friend. And it was again another bridge to what we're going to talk about. And I realize I only have 30 minutes, right? But another bridge is that Woody was very improvisational.
Mm,
When you're working with him, he writes hilarious lines, and you kind of want to use them, but he says say anything you want, as long as he opens you up to, because he wants it to seem loose and improvised and real. So he
mm,
encourages you
yeah.
to do that. And I didn't really, I mean, actually his lines are better than anything you could come up with on the spot, but I actually did come up with a couple of lines on the spot, and they're in the movie and they're in the screenplay, and they were just my improv line.
Wow.
And this movie, United 93, that we're going to talk about,
Mm,
and in fact, the scene that you're about to see, well, no, it wasn't improvised, because what it's based on is the actual transcript that they had
mm,
from the 911 operator when Edward Felt called 911, and he was the only guy on the plane. They were talking on the phone. This is the story of, shifting now to United 93. The story of United 93. The reason that they decided that they should bring this plane down, that they should do that they should, which nobody did. If you were hijacked, if you were on a plane hijacked, you were supposed to cooperate, and they would take you back to the airport, and they would whatever. Nobody ever tried to take over the cockpit and and fight these guys to get the plane, control of the plane, which is what they did. But that's because they heard what had happened to the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, because they were on those phones. Remember on airplanes, they used to have those
yeah.
phones on the back of every seat?
Yeah.
And the people, we were herded by the terrorists into the back of the plane, and the people used those phones to call their family, and they heard what happened. And they
Yeah.
told the few people who talked to their family, well, they had if they didn't have recordings, they had the memory of those conversations, so they knew that. But in my case, it was an actual transcript of that call, so I could use that for lines. But
Right.
it felt it.
Yeah, let's show this scene and we'll be right back.
Together, all right? Sit! Sit! Yeah, sit! Sit! You're not supposed to be able to see the ground that low.
Going up as fast.
Hello? 911? 911. Yes. Hijacking in progress. I'm in the bathroom. United Flight 93.
Okay, so a couple of things. I mean, obviously, as it's a difficult film to watch, even however many years pass. It's not
Right.
it's not easy, and we've heard a bunch of different accounts of things that have happened on that day. So to really kind of be a fly on the wall, it's difficult. It's a difficult film, and so this film was directed by Paul Greengrass, and a lot of people might know him from, the Bourne series. We're used to seeing him direct, kind of action-heavy films, and obviously this film also does have a lot of action. But can you tell us, one, what it was like to get the call from your agent saying, "Hey, there's this opportunity," or whoever you got that call from, and two, how did you wrestle with making a film so close to this? Because this was released in 2006. So can you just kind of talk us through that, like what you kind of felt as an actor, trying to, to have to portray something like this?
Yeah, great question. And it was released in 2006, and it was probably, made in 2004 and 5. So I'm not exactly sure, but it was even closer.
Yeah.
And I lived in New York, and I lived downtown in New York. It all felt very. I mean, my son went to school in Brooklyn, and 20 people from his high schools were lost at Cantor Fitzgerald. It was all very close.
Yeah.
So I have, an agent who called me because the casting director, talked about this opportunity to work with Paul Greengrass. Mm-hmm. And I was already aware of Paul because I'd actually seen that movie Bloody Sunday, mm-hmm. which he made, which is an amazing movie about the uprising in Ireland. And, so this was, as an actor, as a working, more or less journeyman actor, you take every opportunity that you can. I went down to the cast, and I knew the casting director. These were Kathy Sandridge and her partner. And these are like A-list casting people. So you knew so you had that. And I went, and it was interesting that he ended up using a lot of theater actors from New York, and I'm one of them. Yeah. And you go to an audition and you see, people from the Broadway stage, from you see the theater community there. Yeah. Very broad, because they're putting together a cast with 38 passengers, so it ranges everywhere.
Yeah.
The audition was an improvisation where you were supposed to pretend in the audition, and you weren't auditioning by yourself either. You were with a couple of people. You were supposed to pretend that you were being hijacked. What would you do? What would you do when the hijacker came and said, "We're taking over this plane"? Mm-hmm. I have to say, I didn't know what the heck. I mean, actors around me were doing things. They were praying. They were doing things. I was like doing nothing. I couldn't get my mind around it. It was like, so I left this, as an actress yourself, you probably have been there. I left this audition thinking, oh my God, how did I blow this opportunity? I mean, don't I know haven't I been doing this long enough to know how to improvise, to know how to do? I did nothing. That was like so embarrassing so when the call came back and they want to see you again, he's calling you back. I thought, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting a second shot at this. Okay, now I'm going to know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pray. I'm going to have a yarmulke in my pocket. I came up with all these things when I went for my callback. The callback, Paul Greengrass was there. The stunt people were there. It was the same sort of thing, except Paul is there. And the terrorists are screaming at you, and how are you react? And the thing went on for 5 minutes. I mean, it seemed like forever.
Yeah.
Wow. I did nothing. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do anything. And I thought, oh my God, I am so fucked. Excuse my French. I could not do it. And I was kicking myself up and down Lower Manhattan when I got the call that they cast me in this movie. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's interesting, because what that says is what he was looking for. Let me tell you something, not knowing what to do, not knowing what the heck where was I, who was I, all of that was real. That's what was going on with me. I was thinking, just like the guy might have think, why did I get on this plane? What am I doing here? All
Yeah.
of those thoughts. And you know about movies, if you're still,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not moving a lot and you're thinking all those thoughts, the camera knows, the camera sees it. I
Yeah.
mean, what I've had to teach myself as a movie actor is, you know, the stiller you are, it's what's happening inside, you know, it's
Yeah.
not what you're, anyhow, that was, and that made me, in a way, that was like, okay, this is, I can trust myself to be, to not come up with any, to not know what I'm going to do, because they wouldn't know. And then
Right.
to try to put it together, to try
Yeah.
to put it together. So that was thrilling to get, great. And then he didn't want to make the movie in America because he thought we were all too close to it. He didn't want any press around. So he took us to Pinewood, which is a fabulous studio in England that, you know, it's a legendary studio. It's, we had dressing rooms in the Stanley Kubrick building.
Oh.
All of the early James Bond movies were made there. I mean,
Wow.
it's, you know, you go down the halls and there are pictures of all the great stuff that is made there. And it's an enormous soundstage with an airplane, with a 747, whatever the hell it was, exactly the same plane that the United 93 is there. And it's cut in half, and half of it is on a hydraulic lift so that it can go, and the other half is, so the whole, and we get there and there's no script. There's no script. There's the 9/11 Commission report, which we all had and were encouraged to read. And then there were dossiers on our characters. And I'm getting away from your question in a way, because what was it like? I mean, I want to go back to this. That first of all, it was it was hard. I mean, this was emotionally, I mean, you know, actors talk about how hard the work is. Normally, no. I mean, for me, I love making movies and it's fun. And you go at the end of the day, you know, if you've done something, you know, usually it's a very exciting, you know, kind of work for me, most of it. This, I mean, it was, you felt good about doing it, but it was hard. It was like sleepless nights and worrying and just, but they took care of you. They were taking care of you in very nice ways. They literally had a bus that was waiting for you after the shooting day that took you to a health club. And they had, you know, you could have a massage, you could work out, you could do, we were all living in the same little hotel together for months. I mean, I think we worked on this for, the hijacking the crash part was about a month. And we had about a month of trying to develop the story, because I said there was no script. So, but they knew certain things. They had those transcripts of calls and things. And we got together in a rehearsal hall and tried to figure out who was going to do what was happening. And then, I mean, I will say, so Paul Greengrass is this great director. The cinematographer was Barry Ackroyd, who was like the cinematographer for Harry Potter, other things, great cinematographer. And his crew, a lot of this was handheld camera. And a crew, I went and looked back at the cast list, because there was a guy, his name was Clem. Clem, he's a German guy, his name was Becker, Clem Becker. And he's a camera op, I mean, he's like listed way down the call sheet as a camera operator. But he was a key person in this thing because of the way they did the camera. The way they did it was they called it a bungee cam. I mean, they did other things, but the bungee cam was down the middle of the plane. There was a track with a bungee cord and the camera sitting at the end of the bungee cord. Clem sitting on a chair with wheels on the floor so that he could hold the camera like this. His sister, who worked with him, pushing it through the plane. And every day, the call sheet would arrive at the night before for the next day's work, and it would say, hijacking to crash. We did the whole thing. We lived through this thing, and we all came home. We set our watches at a few minutes before the hijacking, and we went all the way till the plane crashed. And they filmed it move through the thing, picking up pieces
Mhm.
of interaction, of action that in this thing for weeks, and then they, did an amazing job of editing it together.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
you had mentioned that there was 38
yeah,
actors. A lot of times you hear on like different sets that if there's sometimes you'll be separated from your other actors to like heighten the tension. Were the actors who played the hijackers, were they part of like the community, or were they kind of kept separate to really enhance that feel so you felt it in the moment?
again, a fabulous question. No, they were kept separate.
They
They were
were.
upset, and we had stunt people filling in for them while we
Ah,
worked out the sequence of events. They
yeah.
knew certain things that I was like a first class passenger. They
Mhm.
knew that they herded the first class passenger to the back of the plane.
Yeah.
They knew what certain stewardesses were doing.
Yeah.
Um, and we had worked out the sequence of events
Mhm.
with the hijackers.
Yeah.
And when we came the first day to do it, and we sat there, and the real hijackers, who we had not met, who we had nothing to do with,
Mhm. Yeah.
it was completely different. It was nothing like what we were expecting. It was much scarier. It
Yeah.
was like, I mean, the guy ripping me out of my seat with the seatbelt wouldn't go. It was so scary. And something I will never forget is like after that first take. I mean, it's much more than a take. After that first morning of shooting it, when we got down, there was a ladder, and we came, like on a plane, and we came down into the studio. They always had tea waiting for us at the thing. And one of these guys who played the terrorist, he's actually the guy who's in that little scene you saw,
Mhm.
was sitting in a chair weeping, just weeping. That it was, I mean, you can imagine for these guys. And
Yeah.
the guy who played the main terrorist, the guy who was the guy who was like in charge,
Yeah.
Khalid Abdullah, his name is. He's the
Mhm.
wonderful actor. He was the father in Kite Runner.
Yes.
This
Mhm.
was his first movie. He was great, but no, they kept us initially. They worked out what they were going to do.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
completely separate from us.
Yeah.
So because he's achieving, it's just like in Sunday Bloody Sunday, he used real soldiers, he used real people on the streets, and he staged that riot again.
Yeah.
It's just like he staged this thing, and it makes it very, very real that way, and
Well, and it
very,
makes it real too in the sense that, I mean, not only it being filmed so close in proximity of the actual events, there's also because I studied Meisner, and so the whole Meisner take is living truthfully in imaginary circumstances. So
right.
obviously this is an imaginary circumstance to all of your actors, but like we all lived through it as a nation, so we kind of have a feel of what it is. But there's also something in Meisner called an as if. So you're supposed to act as if this is happening to you. Well, it sounds awkward to say this, but as an actor, you had the fortune of knowing what the end result was going to be. So you already knew how to act as if because you saw everything unfold. And from an acting perspective, obviously this is a heavy subject and it's a heavy movie, but just kind of like in a more general sense, do you find it easier to play real life characters, or is it easier for you to use your creative brain to create a backstory, because you did still have to create a backstory with this character?
Yes. I mean, it's interesting because, of course, as if is a very useful tool. Use it all the time in every moment of, this is a moment like, oh, I know this moment.
Mm.
This is a moment like, oh, it would be as if, I was. But in this situation, you don't always have to use that tool
Right.
because this was so real.
Right.
This was so, for what reason that you say, that we
Yeah.
lived through the reality of it.
Yeah.
What he's doing is creating all of this stuff to reinforce that sense that it's the real thing. And I'll tell you, there was a thing, I believe this is sort of backstory of the movie, but I think this is true. In order to make it seem real, he had he wanted the plane, he wanted the sound of what it sounds like when you're flying in a plane, not like, the silence of a sound stage.
Right.
So he had the sound of the plane, but that interfered with the sound. We had to redo most of the sound in post-production so that they could, deal with that. And they had actors, I did it in New York, actors were doing it in England and in Australia. A lot of the actors of those, there were only, ballpark, like 10 maybe American actors
Oh, okay.
in that. There were lots of them were Americans,
Mm.
British equity, living in England.
Got it.
Which they have a much less favorable deal than actors who are SAG actors who get to
I see.
residuals and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
But they get a buyout and whatever. It's a different thing, and so a lot of them. I mean, they were great, but the key people were Americans. Cheyenne Jackson, I don't know. He's a great musical theater actor. He played and David Bosch. They played the Let's Roll guys.
Mhm.
That was they made that was sort of separate. And in the movie also the air traffic control was separate. And that's a really interesting story about this movie. They had an actor who came to Pinewood while we were still working. They were going to be the head of air traffic control.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they had the guy who was actually the head of air traffic control for the United States on the day, it was his first day of work. This is real. His first day on the job, in that job, was 9/11.
Oh, God.
And he ran and he did he brought all the planes in the country down. He did all of that. And he was there as a production advisor so that they would get it right.
Wow.
Paul ended up letting the actor go and using the real guy.
I didn't know that.
He's
Wow.
fantastic in the movie. And there were other air traffic controllers. There was a guy who was the air traffic controller in New York, the real guy, who did it in the movie, and he was great. And he decided he wanted to be an actor. I actually tried to help him get an agent because I thought he was great too. But that was sort of Paul Greengrass thing.
Well, and so you've said you didn't have a script. You had bits and pieces. So how did the final product come to be of the movie that we've seen?
Yeah, well, it's editing. Very often and it's a masterful job of editing this movie. One of the things that editors, here's why I mean, I truly believe this is a great movie. I think it'll stand the test of time. People didn't want to see it at the time. I don't think it had a great box office. Fortunately, it was on HBO. But it's funny. I'm from Baltimore originally, and I'm involved with the Maryland Film Festival. And every year, John Waters gets to curate a special screening, and he screened United 93 because he said not enough people saw this movie, and people needed to see it. And he had me be on a panel. And I got to go out afterwards to clubbing with John Waters in South Baltimore.
What? That's a story for another time that I need to hear.
That's a story for another time. That was great. And what it was like, oh, okay, so here's something. Like, the movie premiered at Tribeca Film. I think we had our premiere at the Tribeca Film Festival.
Okay.
And they rented, it's funny, I was going to say Radio City, but I think it was actually the Ziegfeld, which is a great, I don't know if you know these places, but they would have premieres there.
Okay.
Could have actually been Radio City. It was an enormous movie theater, and they invited all of the families who had never seen it before.
Yeah.
And then they had, a big audience, Tribeca. So De Niro was there, and everybody was there. It was very exciting to see it, and that was the first time I saw it. And I know what I was going to say, that in editing, one one of the amazing things is, of course, everybody knows how the story ends,
Yeah.
right? Everybody knows that nobody on that plane lived.
Mm.
How do you create suspense? How does a director make an audience on the edge of their chair? It's just like what I was thinking, Romeo and Juliet. I mean, like, how do you this time it's going to be different,
Yeah.
that's an amazing thing that he knows how to do. And that, I think, is something that editing has a lot to do with it, because it's the pace that they create, and the whatever that, but he created, the movie is actually suspenseful, even though
Yeah.
the whole audience at the end, when that movie ended, there was a silence, a total silence. And then you heard a weeping, wailing sound from the families, from the back of the thing. It was chilling. And then we all went to Four Seasons and had a big party. But yeah, and as I said, his daughter just saw the movie. I mean, it's a great thing about the time that we live in. We can see movies. I mean, people will still see that movie. I mean, that movie is there. It doesn't have to have a screening in a movie theater.
So the character that you played, his daughter recently saw that film,
Yes.
correct?
I told you that before we started. Yes.
Yeah, it's okay.
Daughter, Adina,
Yeah.
Adrienne wrote me an email. I got an email out of the blue, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, that said, I'm Edward Felt's daughter, and I couldn't see the movie at the time. I'd never seen the movie, and I just saw the movie, and I was really happy and relieved that you made me proud of my father, and you made and the movie is such a great movie, and thank you. And I have to say, this is interesting. You asked me earlier about what's it like to play a real
Yeah.
person,
Mhm.
and I haven't played that many. I mean, most of the characters that I played in movies are fictional characters where, as you say, you create a backstory and you create these characters. It's a big responsibility to play somebody that's real.
Yeah.
What was his wife? What was his children? Plus, this had an added thing in that he had actually been portrayed as a coward, as someone who was, because they said, okay, well, we were taking the plane down.
Mm.
He was locked in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was smart enough he was the only guy who called 911. And he was telling them, this plane is going for, here it is. And, if you're the 911, you can see where we are. And it was an incredibly smart thing to do. He was an incredibly smart guy.
Yeah.
To make that call on his phone, and he was it's interesting. His brother is a man named Gordon Felt, who actually created with the Clintons, created Shanksville, created the memorial to
Okay.
at Shanksville.
Wow.
And Gordon Felt was there at the first screening and came up and introduced himself to me and said, "Good job," which, was an enormous, I mean, I didn't care really about anything else.
Yeah.
I was just so worried that they would,
Yeah. I mean, this is going to kind of sound like an odd question to start, but we're living in an age of streaming services and these big kind of commercialized films, and we have a mix of that, and then plus like independent film and television and all of these things. And a lot of times people will ask you as an actor, well, why did you start acting? Like, and I think a lot of people kind of give the general answers, and they just say, I was always like a shy kid and I needed an outlet, and you hear all of these things. When you are in that room screening that movie with the real life families of the people that you portrayed, or when you get an email from the daughter of a man that you portrayed, does that change your answer of why you became an actor, or does it shift your priority of what you feel the responsibility of an actor is? Because it goes way beyond just like popcorn film sometimes. Like you do have you were saying you have the responsibility, you have this kind of weight on your, your shoulders of portraying this, but you also have the opportunity to maybe give a family closure, maybe, bring light to something that people aren't aware of. I mean, it's a big responsibility, but it also can bring a lot of beauty. So did that change? Did those circumstances change
Um,
any way that you felt about yourself as an actor?
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a good, that was definitely, you know, acting has a lot to do with the audience. I mean, you're striving to affect people's lives,
Yeah.
to make them happy, to take them out of their life, to teach them something, to give them something. I mean, it's a very generous thing that you're doing, is
Mhm.
is transforming yourself to help create a world that's going to, impact the real world, their world. I mean, it's interesting when you said that, it made me think of my first professional job. But before drama school, when I was a kid who wanted to be an actor, and
Mm.
um, but I, my first professional job was at a regional theater in Baltimore called Center Stage, and the play was a docudrama called Trial of the Catonsville Nine. The Catonsville Nine was a priest named named Barragan brothers, who burned draft cards and were just as a protest against the Vietnam War, and they were in jail.
Yeah.
And they had just gotten, and somebody wrote a docudrama about this trial, and the nine had just gotten out of jail, and I played one of them. I mean, it's funny because I had an apprenticeship at this theater. I had a fellowship where I was supposed to do costumes and lights and be a spear carrier, basically. And I got a call from the director saying they had a part for me in the first production of the season. Well, they had picketers, people trying to, you know, this was kind of an anti-war play, and it was 1971 or two,
Oh.
and people were, trying to take the funding of the theater away, and the guy who I was playing had just gotten out of jail, and he was the advisor to the production. So I was playing a real guy who just got out of jail, and I didn't fight in the Vietnam War. I protested the Vietnam War. Being able to do this as an act of sort of protest in this way was very powerful.
Right.
And, yeah, so that's an interesting part of what we do. Of
Yeah,
act.
for sure. For
And
sure.
of
I mean,
course, the great thing about movies is that they have, they they affect millions. I mean, they reach millions and millions of people.
right. I mean,
Um,
and do you think just to go back to the film really quick, because talking about theater, I there's always, because I grew up doing theaters as well, and it's there's a value in being on the stage, and there's with constantly doing rehearsals, and you don't get to do that as much in film. Although it sounds like you did have some opportunities with this film to kind of go through it. But there is a lot of action in this film. There's a lot of moving around. You were saying about how like the airplane being on hydraulics. Do you think that some of your theater training and just kind of being familiar with the movement and knowing how to work with your body helped in this circumstance?
yeah. I mean, it's interesting that all the actors and all the American actors
Mm.
were theater actors, were trained theater actors,
Mm.
and I do think he realized that was, and it's interesting. Khalib Abdullah, he had just come back from doing a year of clown work with this guy in Paris, Philippe Gallier,
Oh.
and he, I think I wasn't trained in clown when they didn't do it at drama school, but now they all do it, and I've taken it, and I think it's incredibly valuable.
Mm.
It teaches you how to be out on a limb and give 110% and not worry about making a fool of yourself. And there are all kinds of things that are really useful for clown work. And when I saw this guy doing it, I was so impressed with what he was doing. I said, man, where did you train? What is your story? He said, clown. I've been doing clown. Yeah. And Emma Thompson and you know, what's his name, Ali G. They all came out. They all worked with this guy. But I think theater. You know, I still do a lot of theater, and you know, it's. I was thinking that. Well, I said to you, like, shooting a movie at its best is like a rehearsal. I mean, I try to feel like, you know, you're like as if you're rehearsing a play, and because you get to do it more. One thing about shooting a movie, even if you haven't had any rehearsal, you're going to do it many, many times. Yeah. You shoot it from many. I mean, one of the tricks about like now that we're doing, that everything is digital, that they don't have to light, that everything is going to moves much, much faster. So you don't get as much. I mean, I did a movie last year called Bombshell. Yeah. And I had a scene, a very good scene actually, with Nicole Kidman. But the actress, there were three of us, an actress named Robin Weigert, and I were playing lawyers for Nicole Kidman, who was playing, Gretchen Carlson. And they shot it. It was interesting because when they first made that movie, it was really a movie that's based on Megyn Kelly and Megyn Kelly's story. And Gretchen Carlson was getting sort of short shrift. They weren't, and in fact, if it hadn't been for Gretchen Carlson, none of it would have happened. She was the one who went out there and took and she was fired. Yeah. So they were making a movie as what was happening inside Fox. She was not inside Fox. Anyway, they were not happy. She was not happy. They were not happy. Her people with how Gretchen was portrayed, and the screenwriter and the fabulous director Jay Roche decided that was right, and they could fix it by writing the scene that I'm in, which was an added scene after the whole movie was done. And one day, and it was shot in such a way that there were three cameras. I guess there was a camera on each, there were three people, there was a camera on each of us in this great living room location. And we did it like a play. We didn't, it wasn't broken up. It wasn't a two shot and a close up. We did the scene from beginning to end, you know, a bunch of times. Yeah. Robin is a Juilliard trained theater actress. She's a fabulous actress. We did 2 plays together, Richard Nelson plays. We know each other, and we hadn't, and this is a great thing about the acting profession. You have this very intense relationship while you're making something. I mean, believe me, United 93, that was intense with all of those people. But when you're in a play, it's like a family, you know, it becomes a family. And those people, that's a very special relationship. And you hope that you work with them, and then you don't see them again, but you have this thing. So Robin, I played her boyfriend in a play called Goodnight Children Everywhere. And it was before she sort of broke through in Dogwood, and she's had a really nice career. And but I hadn't seen her in years. But when we went to the costume fitting with one of the world's great costume designers, Colleen Atwood, multiple Academy Awards for movies with you know, Tim Burton and I mean, anyway. I know Colleen. I've worked with her, and we went, and Robin and I, we met at the costume fitting, and then the next day. But having that working, that trust, that sense, and you know, I got to say, I like the scene of mine in Bombshell. And it's the listening thing that you were talking about before, it's, you know, and that comes from theater training actually, and Rob, you know, so we were able to find each other and we're working with one of the great stars, and it was her, you know, it was she was the focus, but but Robin and I think our comfort level with each other, because we were supposed to be people, lawyers who really knew each other and worked together, our help Nicole do what she had to do, which was a very emotional scene actually for her. And, we were three happy actors on those sofas.
Well, I mean, and just to kind of to tie back what you just said with United 93 is that, Bombshell, you were saying, you're supporting Nicole, and that's typical for like a lot of movies. It was like the star of the movie, the supporting, whatever. But with United 93, it was purely ensemble.
Right.
So, I mean, when you have that, you have this mentality already, hopefully people do, going in like we're all in this together. So when you have that kind of tight-knit feeling and putting it onto the feeling that was there on that plane, having that community only serves the story even better. So when you saw your fellow actors in United 93, you feed off of the terror that they're seeing. You're all there in it together. Just really quick, what was it like once you wrapped? Did you feel like, because you hear a lot of actors sometimes saying that, like, their spouses like couldn't handle them during shooting because they're so in their head, or did you have a moment to, aside from them taking you to get massages, did you have a moment of just like, okay, this is done, we wrapped, and you really were able to think back on everything that you did? Or were you trying to be in it as much as you could day to day?
Well, yeah. I have a very good friend, a wonderful actor named Chip Zion, who, it was, first of all, he was doing a Broadway play. He left a Broadway play to come do this, and he knew that he was playing a guy who was going to be killed. Who had his throat slit. He was a first-class passenger. He figured they would kill me, and then he would go home back to his play.
Yeah.
But that's not the way this worked. So he had to be dead, bleeding on the floor for the whole thing for, weeks and weeks and weeks. But because of the ensemble thing, because of what we were doing, I mean, it wasn't something anybody really complained about. We felt we were doing something important. And there was and that was a real, normally, you hear stories, but normally I love being on a set because everybody is usually focused on making something really good, is really, it's even all kinds of sets, TV, no matter what it is. Very rarely are people like phoning it in. And in this case, people were very, very committed to doing this. And when it was over, it wasn't entirely over because, as I told you, we had to come back and do, first of all, they wanted it for Tribeca. They wanted it because, think about it.
Yeah.
Tribeca came out of 9/11. That's what. So, and Tribeca wanted it. So, and it was extremely difficult editing, sound editing, all of these post-production things. So they were under enormous pressure, and they needed to know where you were going to be. Will you be available to come in this day and do that? Because I forget exactly, 8:30 to 9:30. I mean, it was about an hour of time from the hijacking to the crash. And all of us are involved in all of that stuff in the back of the plane from the beginning to the end. And so they would have Mabel, they would be working on little parts of it, and they would have you come in. So and you would see little pieces of it. So it was ongoing that way. Plus, as I said, the American actors in it, or theater actors who I see, are part of my life. So we would sort of see each other, and then people wanted to hear about it. So it wasn't one of those things where it's over, and everybody was away from their family. Nobody, we were in, and the unusual thing is we were in a hotel all together. They put us all together. Nobody was, not the hijackers, but all the passengers were living in the same place for the shoot, and we were away from our families.
Yeah.
And we had a day off, whatever. I think we had 2 days off, and we went to London and saw lots of plays. But that was great.
Yeah, so I mean, luckily, you know, it was, I'm sure, an honor of yours to portray this real life person and to be in something that portrays one of the most horrific things that we know as Americans. But you know, from everything that Paul did, with, you know, picking this ensemble, the way that he kind of plotted out the production, it's really great when you hear those stories of people are watching out for you, and it really seems that like he knew what this was going to
Yeah.
take from actors, and he wanted to protect you all as much as you could.
I have to say that in my experience, and I've worked with some great directors in my time, the English directors have a kind of respect for acting and
Mm.
for actors. And they really, I mean, I did a movie called Mr. Wonderful, which was the first movie that Anthony Minghella shot in the States. And he said, you know, he was really interested in what you thought and what the actor was thinking and what the
Yeah.
actor had to bring to the table. And that was certainly true in this case. Um, and he, you know, there was a lot of trust because we were, you know, we were free to, and the producers of this movie, you know, working title, Tim Bevan and Eric Fellner, who were like one of the, you know, the great producers, they completely stayed out of it. I mean, they would show up. We would only, and the guy, and Levin, the producers would show up we would see them in London on the day off, but they never imposed anything. Paul was left to create this thing, and with us, I mean, you felt like you were making something with him, you know, and that was that's unusual, and
Yeah.
that was, you know, I mean, anybody who's watching this who hasn't seen the movie, it's cathartic, it's scary, it's suspenseful, it's a masterpiece. It is truly a masterpiece, and you're right that it's a true ensemble. I mean, there's an unusual. I mean, it's an ensemble,
Right.
and it's interesting. Let me tell you this, and we can wrap up because he said to us, I remember this very well, the first day of rehearsal, when we were all gathered at Pinewood, and he said, okay, here's the way I see this movie, and here's the story that I think we need to tell. These people, these 38 people, these people were the first people to live in a post 9/11 world, in a world where terrorists where Al Qaeda can do this,
Yeah.
and the terms in which you're going to, and you have to fight, and essentially, you better be ready to fight back. You better put your life on the line and fight back, or else you're going down. These people are aiming this plane. That's what they were doing, aiming this plane for the Capitol. This plane was going to crash into the United States Capitol. I mean, their agenda was to bring us down this way. And these people shifted their perspective, because normally, if a plane is hijacked, you cooperate and it lands. And, you know, nobody had ever tried to take over the plane from guys. And they had bombs they
Right.
weren't real. They made you think they had these, you know.
Yeah.
This was incredibly dangerous. They were they risked their lives. They lost their lives, but I'm gonna cry.
Yeah.
It's really moving what they did. And
Yeah.
so he said, we have to tell the story of these people, these people. And you have to realize also, which is very tricky, all of them they were not acting in concert. They would not have been acting all together. A leader had to emerge. Well, the leader was an actor named Christian, what's his name? He's on Blacklist a lot. Christian, I can't remember his last name at the moment. But, you know, the guy there needs to be somebody who's a character, who has executive experience, who has leadership qualities. Like, you know, I said at the audition, the real thing for me was, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know what to do. I'm terrified. I don't know. One of my best friends, who I talked about this, he's a guy, he was an Eagle Scout. He's the kind of guy who he would totally know what to do. he would totally step up and be the leader and say, this is what we have to do that. So who was that person going to be? So we had to figure that out. We had to discover that, and which of the stewardesses were going to help him, and what were the dynamics, and what were the people who were resistant, who didn't want to do it, who were fighting back. All of that stuff was explored a lot, and with everybody committed to who their character was and what their character would have done. That's why I said the people who had real, like Chip Zion, who was killed, whose throat was slit in the thing, but his family thought it must have been much more heroic than that. He must have done,
Yeah.
very difficult. But at the end of the day, you made a piece of, and it's art, and it's valuable.
For sure. Wow. I mean, this has just been a wonderful, wonderful conversation, even if it's in the, talking about a topic that is not particularly easy. So thank you so much for explaining to us some of the backstory of making this film, and just talking about film in general. You're definitely a wealth of knowledge, and if you have not seen United 93, please make sure to watch it. And just wanted to thank everybody for tuning in to Great Movie Scenes, the first series to talk about just that, great scenes from movies. Thank you to our guest, Mr. John Rothman, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks.